Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for being here. Before I give a formal introduction to Jim's life and work, I just want to comment that in 1976, I arrived at Georgetown University's Kennedy Institute of Bioethics as a graduate student, and one of the first people I met was Professor James Childress. We became good friends and worked together in the late 70s. I forget, it was 77, 78, somewhere around there. I worked as his graduate assistant, and it was when he and Tom Beecham were putting together the first edition of Principles of Biomedical Ethics, which is the classic text for bioethics. Working as a graduate assistant that day meant traveling to more libraries than I knew existed in the DC area because the internet was not yet invented. And so to get materials, you had to just go and find them somewhere. But Jim and I have crossed paths over the years. Most recently in January, Dr. Art Kaplan at the New York University Medical School convened a group of about 20 bioethicists and surgeons to talk about face and hand transplantation, among other things, which is a very complex new issue that's arisen. And Jim and I both happen to be in that small group, and the paper I gave earlier was actually a reflection of some of the comments and discussion that we had that day. But I'm delighted that the committee accepted my nomination last year and has welcomed Jim to the university campus. I believe he told me this is the first time he's been at Villanova, so I hope it's not the last. And Marcia, I just met today, and I'm very pleased to have met you. So let me give a formal background of Jim's biographical information. James F. Childress was university professor, the John Allen Hollingsworth Professor of Ethics, Professor of Religious Studies, and Director of the Institute for Practical Ethics and Public Life at the University of Virginia until he retired a year ago in May 2016 and became an emeritus professor. He has also been Professor of Public Policy in the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy and Professor of Research and Medical Education in the School of Medicine. He served as chair in the Department of Religious Studies for 11 years and principal of Monroe Hill College, now named Brown College, from 1988 to 1991. In his 44 years of teaching at UVA, he taught over 19,000 students and directed or co-directed 50 dissertations. Jim is the author of numerous articles and several books in biomedical ethics and in other areas of ethics. His books in biomedical ethics include Principles of Biomedical Ethics with Tom Beecham, now in its 7th edition and translated into 7 languages. It is really the centerpiece of bioethical research. It has been an irreplaceable resource for people in bioethics for the 40 years that since we put it first together. And we thank you for that contribution. He is co-author of, with 3 others, of Essentials of Public Health Policy Ethics. His other books include Moral Responsibilities in Conflicts and Civil Disobedience and Political Obligation. He is also co-author of the Dictionary of Christian Ethics, 2nd edition with John Macquarie, Christian Ethics, Problems and Prospects with Lisa Cahill, Belmont Revisited, Ethical Principles for Biomedical Research with Eric Meslin and Harold Shapiro, and Organ Donation, Opportunities for Action with Catherine Liverman. Jim has been actively involved in several national committees examining bioethics and public policy. He was vice chair of the National Task Force on Organ Transplantation, and he has served on the board of directors of the United Network for Organ Sharing, UNOS, the UNOS Ethics Committee, the Recombinant DNA Advisory Committee, the Human Gene Therapy Subcommittee, the Biomedical Ethics Advisory Committee, and several data and safety monitoring board for NIH clinical trials. He was member of the presidentially appointed National Bioethics Advisory Commission from 1996 to 2001. He has also chaired the Health Sciences Policy Board of the Institute of Medicine. Jim is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine, formerly the Institute of Medicine, and an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He is also a fellow of the Hastings Center. In 1990, he was named Professor of the Year in the state of Virginia by the Council for Advancement and Support of Education. In 2002, he received the University of Virginia's highest honor, the Thomas Jefferson Award. In 2004, he received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Society of Bioethics and Humanities. In 2010, he received the Henry Knowles Beecher Award from the Hastings Center. He has held a Guggenheim Fellowship, an American Council of Learned Societies Fellowship, a postdoctoral liberal arts fellowship at Harvard Law School, and a fellowship at Woodrow Wilson Center. In 2010, he was Carrie and Ann McGuire Chair in American History and Ethics at the Library of Congress. In 2011 and 2016, he was a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in Medicine at the University of Munster in Germany. Jim was Joseph P. Kennedy Senior Professor of Ethics at the Kennedy Institute of Georgetown University from 1975 to 79, and a visiting professor at the University of Chicago Divinity School and Princeton University. He received his BA from Guilford College, his Bachelor of Divinity from Yale Divinity School, and his MA and PhD from Yale University. I think you can see why I nominated Jim last year, and we welcome you to receive this award, which has become very important for Villanova. And thank you so much.
Okay, so as a memento, we've got one of these beautiful clocks to give you, and I'd just like to read it. The Praxis Award in Professional Ethics, James F. Childress, in recognition of his commitment to professional integrity, presented this 5th day of April 2017, the Ethics Program, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Villanova University. And along with this is a $1,000 stipend for you to maybe refurbish that office that I was talking about. All right, thank you.
Thank all of you very much. I really appreciate the presence of President Donahue and the participation of Dean Lindemeyer in this ceremony. It is such an honor to receive the Praxis Award in Professional Ethics. And I'm truly grateful to the selection committee, which Mark Dorley, Director of the Ethics Program, chaired, and to Jim McCartney for his nomination and introduction. I was very moved and touched by that and by the presentations of Matt Puffer and Rich Miller, even if I didn't always recognize myself. I truly appreciate the many contributions from so many others to today's events and activities. Many were named by Mark Dorley, and I'll return to some of these later. On one occasion, when a seminar I was teaching took a break after an intense hour-long discussion of a hard case in bioethics and public policy, an undergraduate sitting next to me just shook her head and said, "I can't believe you do this for a living." Had my wits been quicker, I would have responded, "I can't believe they pay me to do this." Perhaps no one should enjoy his or her work as much as I have enjoyed mine and still enjoy it. What I do is my vocation and my avocation, and I love it, even in retirement. What I do offers its own reward, but I'm glad I received compensation for it, and I'm very grateful for the recognition and honor of the Praxis Award. In acknowledging this honor, I want to record my gratitude to two women who have been partners with me, who have not only tolerated my dedication to my vocation and avocation, but have also encouraged and worked very closely with me. My late wife, Georgia, who sadly died a few months before our 36th anniversary, and my wife, Marcia, who teaches medical humanities at UVA, and I'm delighted is here today. And their support has been indispensable, and I'm really grateful. I've also benefited greatly over the years from being able to work so closely with imaginative and rigorous colleagues like Tom Beecham, and undergraduate and graduate students in communities of discourse about ethics. You've heard from three of them today. Jim McCartney, and again, his contribution to the first edition of Principles of Biomedical Ethics we acknowledge profusely in the introduction, particularly the cases that he put together, traveling around DC and elsewhere to get the information. And it's been great to be able to continue interacting with him over time. Rich Miller, I've known longer than I've known anyone else here today, back to his undergraduate days, and he was a kind of bright, eager, serious undergraduate that we all long to teach and long remember after we've done so. And so I followed his career in ethics with great interest and admiration. Thanks, Rich, just as I thank Jim. Matt Puffer, I enjoyed having him as a great participant in several graduate seminars, particularly the one he mentioned on just war theory, and serving as the lead teaching assistant and helping to prepare materials for a later edition of Principles of Biomedical Ethics. Yes, that book continues to chug along, and Tom and I have now started on the next and last edition. And I was honored to serve as co-director of Matt's dissertation on Augustine's conception of the image of God and its ethical implications. I specifically mention these to indicate how the academic ethics community exists and extends over time and space. But I also want to thank several people I've not had the pleasure to interact with until today. Again, Mark Dorley, Sarah von Brightman, and for the powerful presentation this afternoon, and Mark Wilson, who responded so helpfully and graciously to my paper at the luncheon seminar, Peggy Elder, and others who have made this day so special. Thanks to all of you. You have a great community here at Villanova. I should have known that already, since Matt Puffer sang the praises of the Villanova community from his time here last year, and it's just been confirmed in my experience today. A true academic community that is concerned about important practical and ethical issues and can engage each other seriously, but always with great civility. It's wonderful. In these brief reflections, I want to explore three maxims drawn in part from my experience in bioethics and professional and public life. Maxim 1, ethics is too important to be left to ethicists. Too often when people say that ethics should be part of the public policy process or professional decision-making, they assume that ethicists, that is, professional philosophers or theologians, should be involved. But on the basis of my experience in professional and public policy settings, ethical insight, imagination, discernment, and wisdom are not concentrated in any one professional group or discipline. One mag even said once, if all the ethicists in the world were laid end to end, it would be a good thing. Well, I think that's a little extreme. I think that ethicists can bring to the table a familiarity with traditions and patterns of moral reflection and reasoning, and those perspectives can often be helpful, if not overdrawn. But they are limited. Ethics is too important to be left to ethicists. My own involvement in bioethics, a subset of practical ethics, came in my second year of teaching at the University of Virginia, when the Center for the Study of Science and Technology and Society, located in the law school, sponsored a faculty-student seminar. Mainly a faculty seminar, which enlisted faculty and a few students, token students really, from law, medicine, and the humanities. I was a lone faculty member from the humanities, and I participated reluctantly because it was my second year teaching, and I was overwhelmed by the task of preparing new courses, such as the one that Rich Miller participated in. But my departmental chair had different ideas. He twisted my arm, and I was persuaded to take part. The topic was artificial and transplanted organs, and the seminar addressed two sets of questions. How can we ethically and effectively increase the supply of artificial and transplantable organs, then mainly dialysis and kidney transplantation? And given the shortage that persists, how can we distribute the available donated organs or artificial organs in an effective and ethical way? I wrote a paper for that faculty seminar entitled Who Shall Live When Not All Can Live, which was published within 6 months, along with a critical response from the head of the nephrology unit at UVA, who had been another member of the seminar. This seminar changed my professional life. I began to focus more and more on biomedical ethics, with particular attention to bioethics and public policy, rather than bioethics in the clinical setting, though I had to do obviously some of that in order to understand enough to be able to do bioethics and public policy. So what attracted me? The focus and richness of the discourse, the ethics discourse, but also the clinical, the legal, and cultural and other discourses, as people came together from different professions and disciplines to examine important problems and to deliberate about appropriate policy responses. For example, in trying to increase the supply of transplanted organs, should we move beyond the then recently adopted policy of express consent by individuals while alive or the next of kin after an individual's death to a policy of presumed consent? Or beyond donation altogether to a regulated market? Questions that still persist. Our ethical discourse is practical in that it focused on real-life problems in an effort to find ethical and effective solutions. And it involved what I've really come to appreciate, including in the conversations here, what I might call, in the words of Amy Gutman and Dennis Thompson, democratic deliberation. Irrespective of the person's background, irrespective of backgrounds of all the participants in the conversation, engaging in a conversation in a deliberative way. So within a few years, I was fortunate to be able to participate, as former students mentioned, in a variety of public policy bodies, and to experience trying to develop with others bioethical recommendations for professional and governmental bodies. Recommendations generated through the lively deliberation of diversely constituted groups. Topics ranging from compensation for research-related injuries to principles for research involving human subjects to organ procurement allocation policies to recombinant DNA research, human reproductive cloning, and the list goes on. Parenthetically, you'll be amused that back in 1970, when I was taking this seminar, I worried about getting too heavily involved in bioethics because I was convinced it was a passing fad. So much for my predictive powers. Maxim 2 is crucial to bridge ethical theory and ethical praxis. The bridge metaphor is powerful, but exactly what does the bridge look like? Well, too often the bridge is described as applied ethics, suggesting that we should simply get our ethical theory or framework right and then merely apply it to practical arenas. While useful, the model of applied ethics is flawed. I find the phrase practical ethics to be more helpful as a way to describe the bridge, because it recognizes that practitioners in various areas have important insights into the ethical dimensions of their practice, into the problems they face day after day. And those insights and the dimensions they identify should be incorporated into ethical analysis and judgment. It's not merely a matter of applying a theory. Indeed, in bridging theory and practice, the insights from the side of practice may even lead to the revision of ethical theory. So the bridge metaphor suggests a highly interactive, dialectical relation between theory and practice, as well as between theorists and practitioners. The traffic moves both ways on this bridge. So the phrase practical ethics captures this bridging better than the phrase applied ethics. Maxim number 3. Stories and metaphors often trump ethical arguments, statistics, etc., in shaping bioethical policy. Changes in public policy and public culture often come through a dramatic case, that is a story, or a dramatic metaphor that redefines the debate so that people can see the situation differently and respond differently to the options they now see. An example, in the mid-1980s, as organ transplantation entered a new era because of new and very effective immunosuppressant medications, then Congressman Al Gore and others held a series of hearings about organ procurement and distribution in this new era. I testified at one of those hearings, and in my recommendations, because after all, you need to come up with some recommendation when you're testifying like this, right? Proposed that Congress consider banning the sale and purchase of organs for transplantation because they were not explicitly banned by the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act that had been adopted all around the U.S. beginning in the late 1960s. Well, Congressman Gore interrupted my testimony to ask if I was aware of any organ sales and purchases in the United States. I replied that I was not, but that I thought that in view of the anticipated great increases in the demand for transplantable organs, Congress might want to consider preemptive legislation to rule it out. He gently but firmly reminded me, you little philosopher there, that Congress was not inclined to undertake preemptive legislation to address hypotheticals, but wanted to address real problems. Well, within a matter of months, Congressman Gore and several others were ready to include in the 1984 National Organ Transplant Act a full-fledged ban on the exchange of organs for valuable consideration. Why this shift? Not because of the arguments that I and other ethicists and others who participated made similar arguments, not because of the evidence of a widespread practice, but because of a story. Media reported that a Virginian, an ex-lawyer and ex-physician, planned to set up a brokerage firm to bring into the U.S. kidneys from third world countries. That story was sufficient to produce a whole new national policy. Another example, as vice chair of the National Organ Transplant Task Force, a little later, I participated in and supported a fundamental shift in metaphors. Before this shift, transplant procurement and surgical teams had dispositional authority over donated organs. In one sense, they owned those organs and could determine how to distribute them without much accountability. Our task force drew on an old metaphor, that of stewardship, to reframe the discussion. We argued that donated organs belong to the community as a whole, and that procurement and transplant teams are best understood as stewards and trustees, to use another metaphor, not owners of donated organs. They are stewards and trustees of these organs on behalf of the community. Now, this had and still has several practical implications, including one very important one, was legitimating the public's participation in setting organ allocation policy. In part because, after all, these organs come from the community, and the need for the community to have a sense that the distributional policies are just and fair. And I could have talked about the metaphor of presumption against war, but that's been talked about this afternoon, I won't. So let me close by saying we cannot and should not try to avoid stories and metaphors in favor of ethical arguments presented in other ways. They are an indispensable part of our discourse too, just like those arguments. But we need to probe and use them carefully, particularly because of their power to evoke and change our emotional responses. Indeed, to use a formulation that we've heard in more recent years, they are often now weaponized. It's not reason versus emotion, but both together. Thank you very much for this wonderful award and for this ceremony today. I'm grateful.